I've got thoughts to wrap up the end of Capaldi's run, but before I can do that, I need to satisfy the part of my brain that needs to rank these things. It's time to rank the episodes in Series 10. Honestly, doing this revisit has reaffirmed it is one of my favorite series of modern era Doctor Who. I really do love it. But I've got to give my thoughts from the bottom to the top. Reminder, when I do these kinds of rankings, I do lump together two-parters as a single story. And in the case of this particular one, it's worth noting that when it comes to the Monk trilogy, I am doing Extremists separate from the other two. While I will grant that Extremists sets up the next two, it is also a complete story in and of itself, and I am going to treat it separate from the others. Okay? Okay. Let's start at the bottom with number 10. Knock Knock. I think it's very telling that what I consider to be the weakest episode of this series isn't actually that bad. There's a reason I said weakest and not worst. I mean, technically it is the worst, relatively speaking, but it's not very bad. It just feels undercooked. It feels like there's a lot of elements that don't really pull together, and they could have in a much more coherent way, especially given the manner in which this series in particular has recurring elements of criticism of capitalism, of exploitation, and they bring in a landlord, and like there is plenty that you can say and do with a landlord character, and they have his motivation be using space bugs to keep his wooden mother alive. I mean, like, points for creativity, I suppose, but, like, you're not mixing your elements particularly well. The Haunted House vibe is decent on it. Performances are okay. It really feels like it does not live up to the potential that its component parts had. And I'm not entirely sure if the people behind this one realized what they could have done with it. Number 9, Eaters of Light. Less an issue of unfulfilled potential and more just straight up forgettable, to the point that I actually forgot to put this one when I did my big ranking list of every episode of Modern Era Doctor Who. I flat out forgot it. So, why is it not lower? Well, just because I find more things that like frustrate me actively about Knock Knock, whereas this, it's just kind of in one ear out the other. It doesn't stick, but it also doesn't really frustrate me or offend me in any particular way while I'm watching it. And there are a couple of really great moments along the way. They are a handful and they're not core to the central thing, but I like the folkloric vibe to the whole thing. I like the stuff with the crows. I like the way that the Picts and the Romans finally being able to understand each other and they realize they sound like children. There are good moments in this, but they're not even core component parts. They're just little moments that I'm like, I mean, that's good. And then the rest of it just drops out of my head. Number 8. Pyramid at the End of the World and The Lie of the Land. This is one of those really frustrating two-parters where the first half is fantastic setup for whatever's going to come next, but then if what comes next doesn't deliver, it just drags the whole thing down. And that's basically what this is. And it's not that Lie of the Land itself completely face plants or drops the ball in every area, but it's doing a few too many things and it just doesn't pan out. It takes a weird turn about halfway through at the point when Bill reunites with the Doctor. There's the whole fake regeneration, which I still think is kind of dumb, not just like as a thing to try and tease the audience with, which halfway through your series, it is a dumb thing to try and tease your audience with. But beyond that, like within the narrative, I'm like, what are you doing? Why? You know, you can see the review for my full thoughts on that thing. But Pyramid at the End of the World is a really good, really strong, really intriguing initial setup for the whole thing. It just ends up going somewhere that, I'm not going to say it goes nowhere, but it's like, that wasn't worth 2 parts to tell this whole thing. Again, some interesting ideas, and again, some good moments. You know, things like the opening to Lie of the Land with the atmosphere and the propaganda and the sense of oppression. It's really good, but it doesn't sustain, and by the end, the way the conclusion works is just kind of weird. Number 7, The Empress of Mars. One of the more solid Mark Gatiss penned scripts, from my perspective. I'm usually not a particularly big fan of when he does Doctor Who. And it's not that he does badly, it's that what seems to appeal to him isn't really what appeals to me. So when his scripts come in, they tend to leave me a bit cold. There are enough really interesting ideas in this one. I mean, just the idea of Victorian era British colonials showing up on Mars. Oh, okay, I'm definitely intrigued. And honestly, going back and revisiting it, I found a little bit more to appreciate in the ways in which the imperial mindset of the British is coming into inevitable conflict with the imperial mindset of the Ice Warriors, and how there is actually a little bit more commentary going on in this, conscious commentary, I do believe, than I'd given it credit for initially. That said, it still just kind of leaves me going, yep, that was an Ice Warrior story. Cool. Okay. And it's fine. It's fine. Number 6, Smile. Like, here's where we start getting into the stuff that, that's really good. It does a great job of expanding the information we got about Bill and how she sort of takes in the world and the way she bounces off the Doctor. I love the chemistry between Bill and Capaldi. It is fantastic. The way Pearl Mackie is able to bounce off this particular incarnation of the Doctor, it's really great and vibrant and lively, and it throws him off his game just a little bit, like just enough to sort of keep him from getting complacent, which I like and I love, and a lot of that is on display here. And there are some really neat ideas in terms of the way the AI does or fails to process how humans work, and where that gap, that lack of understanding of specific things about humans that is, well, certainly true of machines right now, and if it carries into the future, maybe has worse consequences than we would have thought. That's an interesting idea, and I love that approach to sci-fi in general. Taking something that, yeah, that's a thing, and extrapolating further out and seeing what's the extreme of this if we go further. It's well handled. There are a couple of like weird logistical things where I'm like, but hardly anything that drags it down that much. Number 5, the pilot. Love the introduction of Bill. Love the reintroduction of Nardole. I love the idea of the Doctor being a professor. I kind of wish the series had done a bit more with that, rather than have it be an occasional cutaway and thing that we see. But it's fantastic as a setup. I love the entire premise of that, and it just feels nice. And I don't know, it's warm is the word that's coming to my mind, and I don't know why, but it just feels reassuring that, like, other than the TARDIS, he has a place where he's coming back to, and actually has a place that he kind of belongs. The idea that the perpetual traveler has something approximating a home, and yet he's still restless and can't stick around because he's the Doctor, naturally. You know, there are little things like I have a little bit of a on how much emphasis is put on the connection between Heather and Bill, but honestly, I've softened on that versus my memory of it. It does still bother me a little bit, but the performances are great. The conceit is weird and creepy and interesting, and actually, I think they kind of did the water dripping thing as a scary element better than Waters of Mars did, if I'm being completely honest. Number 4, Thin Ice. This is one that I always liked it just fine, but I really did not give this one the credit it deserved when I had watched it initially. It has such a strong component and interweaving of the ideas of, well, having someone like Bill experience this era of London, seeing how much more diverse it is than she would have thought, and yet it's still lorded over by this greedy, soulless white guy who's not an alien, isn't even being manipulated by aliens. He's just a greedy industrialist. And he's going to do what greedy industrialists did and still do. So it feels terrifically melded together, all the different emphasis. And again, the interactions between Bill and the Doctor, the way Bill reacts when a kid first of all, a kid dies. Wow. And the way Bill reacts to that, the way the Doctor has to answer her questions about that, it speaks so much to the way that they connect and the way that they bond and how their relationship is built over the course of this series. This is a really good episode. I feel like it's not given as much credit as it deserves. Number 3, Extremists. This is just wonderful. science fiction. Like, look, let's be honest. It's all fake. It's all a dream. It's all a simulation. That's really hard to make work. It's a cliche, to be completely honest. But this story made it feel fresh by coming at it as the answer to a setup that I didn't think could possibly have a workable answer. There is a truth about the world that no matter who finds it out, they make the decision to die. They make the decision to exit out and not be a part of this world anymore. What could possibly do that? The fact that you're not even real. Yeah, that is a good answer to a setup that I was like, no answer is going to be worth it. And again, people can debate, well, like not everyone will react like that. That's not the point. The point is, it's an answer that I believe for that setup. And I didn't think they'd come up with one. And the way in which they managed to have the Doctor kind of just lose, or this fake incarnation of the Doctor, because you can't defeat them. They literally control the world. It's a game to them. And they even say that literally, this is a game. And yet, it can still feel triumphant at the end, just because it's sending the information to the actual Doctor, and that smile, that smirk at the end.
Pressing send.
And yeah, that this manages to go as dark as it does, and yet still feel triumphant and hopeful at the end. Mwah. Number 2, Oxygen. Now, this is definitely one where all of the ongoing themes and recurring motifs across the series about criticisms of capitalism, of oppression, of industrialism, of colonialism, of the whole entire idea of taking something that is very much going on now and taking it to an extreme to make a point, like we saw in some other episodes. This is where it all comes together and is done to near perfection. Because anyone who makes the decision to try and argue against this episode being like, capitalism wouldn't actually go that extreme, it's ridiculous, it's overblown. Look, it's supposed to be. That is the point of this kind of science fiction, to take something, extrapolate it out to a point that it in fact may never reach, in order to exaggerate the inherent problems we already have. You expand them, you blow them up, you put a magnifying glass on them so they appear much bigger than they actually are, and maybe bigger than they will ever be, but just so you can recognize this problem exists. The exploitation of workers, the restricting of resources, vital life, giving necessary resources from the people who actually make the thing work, and viewing everyone as an asset, as a number, and not as a human being. This happens. This is the world we live in. And if it takes extrapolating out to this kind of extreme to make the point, freaking do it. And on top of that, the stuff with Bill when she almost she does kind of die for a little bit. That is wonderfully intense. They maybe overdid it because they kind of give her 2 almost sort of deaths. Maybe one more than necessary, but they're both still really well done. And the way the Doctor is able to turn this around and bring it to a satisfying conclusion just by defiance and saying, hey, we are going to make it more expensive for you to ignore us than to deal with us. Yes. I love this episode so much. Doesn't hit number 1 though. And number 1 really should not come as a surprise to anybody. World Enough in Time and the Doctor Falls. Historically, I have considered World Enough in Time to be the superior of these 2 parts. And while it is still really good and is incredibly, deeply painful to watch what happens to Bill, and it is so creepy, and it is perfectly executed, slow build horror, The Doctor Falls is, as far as I am concerned, a masterpiece of summation of who the Doctor in general and Capaldi's Doctor in specific is and why he does what he does.
I do what I do because it's right, because it's decent, and above all, it's kind.
and giving him the chance to vocalize that directly by confronting the master, but also giving the chance to show it. It is both showing and telling. And sometimes people will say, well, if you show, you don't need to tell it. But when the dialogue is this good and when the delivery is this good from someone like Capaldi, you let him tell also, but then you back it up by showing how his compassion drives him, even if he is certain that he's not only going to lose, he's going to die. How his belief and his hope and his faith is not always rewarded. He told Bill that he could save her, but he can't. He thought he could, but he can't, and he has to own up to that. Even the conclusion with Heather, I have come around on for the most part. A couple of tiny niggles about that, but even that, taking a revisit and re-examination of that, no. That it works. It all works. Honestly, the only thing holding this back is the fact that this should have been the actual regeneration instead of setting up Twice Upon a Time. But other than that, this is Doctor Who in general, and as a closing story in particular, at its best. I love Series 10, and I adore this ending. It's actually, I think, fairly uncommon for Doctor Who to end on its strongest note in any given series. But it does here, and I love it. My ranking for Series 10. What do you think? How would you rank them? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. I have a Patreon. That is what keeps this entire thing going, and there are rewards for every tier. From access to a Discord to getting to participate in polls and seeing the docket for what I plan to do in upcoming months, to getting your name in the credits, which you'll be seeing a little bit. But if you're not able to do that, there's YouTube memberships as well. Also, just like, share, subscribe. It all helps me out and grows the channel and keeps the algorithm from burying me, which it likes to do sometimes, often. But you also don't have to do any of that. Because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.